Hello and welcome to Ballot Meridian 2018 General Election coverage on HOMTV. I'm Xavier Thompson. Joining me in studio is Meridian Township Clerk Brett Dreyfus to go over all the important election information voters need to know for the November 6th general election. Brett, thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So I want to start off with asking you, what is the general election and how is it different from the primary?
So the primary election, which occurs in August, is an election that allows voters to select the nominees that they want for their political party. So that's the election where you only get to vote in one political party's candidate selections. And that people sometimes get confused about that because they want to be able to vote for like their favorite Democrats and maybe their favorite Republicans, and you can only vote for one party. The general election is where all the selections that were made in the primary are now placed onto the ballot for the general election. So all the people that made their selections in the Democratic Party and want their best candidates to go forward are now placed on the November ballot. And they run against, all the political parties run against one another. The November election is going to take place next Tuesday, November 6th. The polls will be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Voters just need to bring a photo ID to show up at the polls if they're a registered voter in order to vote. You can contact the clerk's office if you have questions and concerns about whether or not you are a registered voter. We can quickly answer that question for you. And we can also tell you if you have questions about where you go to vote, and we'll tell you where to go to your polling location.
Okay, and now can you explain how do people properly vote? How do they properly fill in the ballot to make sure it counts?
So there are two ways to vote. You can vote at the polling location or you can vote via absentee ballot. Most communities across the United States, including Meridian Township, are slowly and steadily moving towards voting by absentee ballot. There's a number of reasons for that. It is convenient. It gives voters a lot more time to look over the ballot and make their selections. The ballot arrives typically in the mail, or you can come to the township office and pick it up. You have anywhere up to several weeks or a month, depending upon when you pick it up, to analyze the ballot, research issues, and cast your votes. For people who have disabilities, people with certain less access to the polls, transportation issues, senior citizens in particular, absentee voting dramatically increases voter turnout. So one way to vote is by absentee ballot. You can still vote by absentee ballot here in Meridian Township and everywhere else in Michigan by requesting an application for an absentee ballot. You can go to the Meridian Township website, clerk section, get the link, click it, and a form will pop up. Fill out the form. It only takes about a minute. You can print out the form, scan it, and email it to our office, to Meridian Township, or you can fax it, or you can drop it off, or you can put it in the mail. It's a little late to do that, so I would not suggest doing that right now. Once you drop it in the mail or scan it, we will mail you a ballot. So that is one way to do that. And you can request an absentee ballot up through this Saturday, November 3rd. The clerk's office will be open from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. And voters can come in person and request a ballot, and then they can take the ballot with them or vote in the township office if they choose. On Monday, November 5th, voters can still come in who are going to be unable to be at the polls on Tuesday, request a ballot, but they have to vote in the building on Monday, November 5th. Between the hours of 8 a.m. and 4 p.m., they can vote in the township offices before Election Day. So that's one way voters can vote. They can vote absentee ballot. If you choose not to vote by absentee ballot because you're eligible to vote in the precinct and you can vote in the precinct, then you will vote in person on the precinct on Tuesday. So those are the methods of voting. The votes are tabulated in an interesting way. Sometimes people ask, well, what do you do with all these ballots, the absentee ballots and the regular ballots? How does it work? So you have to, again, we separate the process of how votes are counted or tabulated depending upon the method of vote. If you vote by in person, each precinct, Meridian has 19 precincts. If you go into precinct 7 and cast your ballot, it goes into a machine called a tabulator. All those votes are added up at the end of the night, and a tally is formed, a tally sheet. In those machines, a digital scan is made of all the ballots as well for backup purposes. No one can associate an individual ballot or the scanned image of the ballot with a particular voter. That's why the stub is taken off when you go, before you place it in the machine, you go to an election inspector and they pull that stub off. That takes away your identity. No longer is your vote ever going to be associated with you as a person. That's why we can handle ballots, take them out, do what we need to do, because we as election workers cannot identify those ballots with a voter. So at the end of a night in a precinct, all the votes are tabulated and a tape is produced. That tape will announce the numbers of the candidates and who would have won, who wins each one, as well as the proposals, the yeses and nos on all the statewide proposals. Any voter, any person is allowed to stay in the precinct as it's being tabulated at the end of the night at 8 p.m. after the polls close. You, me, anybody can go in there and watch and wait and then request to see what the results are immediately. So you can wait till whenever that is. Sometimes the precinct is not balanced. There's an issue. A ballot or a voter doesn't match the final numbers at the end. In that case, you might have to wait around for a while, but the numbers can be reported. Now, the other part of how the votes are counted is with the absentee ballots. The absentee ballots, right now, we have mailed out 7,000, right now probably close to 7,500 ballots have been mailed out, a huge number for a gubernatorial election. We've received back over 5,500 ballots back, have come to us back. These are voted ballots. The ballots are all sealed, and they're placed in our clerk's office in the back in a sealed, locked room that nobody can get into, nobody has access to. Those ballots are stored by precinct number. Precinct 1 may have 420 returned. Precinct 2 may have 227 returned. All of those on election day are placed in a central location, in this case above the police station in our police building. In a room, locked room upstairs, all the workers there cannot leave. They're there from 8 a.m. until 10 p.m. and they're not allowed to leave because these are live, active ballots and no one's allowed, they can't report what they're seeing. They tabulate them through a high-speed tabulator, and those results are done similarly to the way the precincts are done. At the end of the night, a results tape is printed for all the absentee voters as well. All the local precinct people take the ballots and all their paperwork to the Meridian Township clerk's office at the end of the night. It's called a receiving board. We process all the polls that come in, all 19 precincts, and we take that absentee counting board of 7,000 or 8,000 absentee ballots, and we combine those results into one. So we have the polls, the absentee counting board, and now we have one set of master results, and those master results, when they're both combined, they're all combined when they're sent to the county. The computer program is able to combine the individual precincts absentee votes with the individual precinct walk-in votes, and that becomes the unofficial results for the night. They don't become official until the Board of Canvassers, within 14 days, certifies the election.
Okay, now you talked about the voting equipment. How do you ensure that it's working properly?
So we do a public test that's required by law, and the public is invited to attend, and we go through the equipment, and we do a logic test. We have a set, it's called a test deck of ballots. And what you do is you create all the different possible combinations to make sure there's no deficiency in the programming. So you might pick one person for governor in here, and then you pick another person for state representative, and then you pick another person for attorney general. And then the next ballot will pick the same two people, but a different person for state representative. When you go through all those different patterns, and there could be 50, 60, or 70 different combinations, you run all of those through all different tabulators. And when you do that, you make sure the tabulator is going to produce the right results. You know what the results are because you created the ballot. So that's one way you test it. And then we also go through and do a rigorous test the days before the election. Aside from the public test, we put fresh paper in all the tabulator rolls. We have to program all the equipment, and then we run another test ballot to make sure it works. That's the best way to do it, and that's what communities do according to state law across the state.
Okay, now I want to ask you a little bit about the makeup of the different precincts. Mm-hmm. We know that people in Hazlet may have a different ballot from Okemos. Can you kind of talk about how the precincts work? How many are there in the township, and how does that work?
We have 19 precincts in the township. One precinct, 16, was consolidated back somewhere in the 2010 or 12 or something or 2006. So we have 19 precincts in Meridian Township. Each precinct has anywhere from, it's different numbers. We try to keep it with anywhere from 1,200 to 1,800 voters. And what else did you want? I'm sorry. What else?
Well, kind of just the makeup of the precincts. How are the ballots different?
So
basically?
The ballots are only different typically when the school district are different. So Hazlet School District in this election are precincts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and half of precinct 20. Those are the Hazlet School District precincts. There is a school board election for Hazlet School Board. So those ballots will contain selections for Hazlet School Board that people in Okemos, and the East Lansing School District, part of Meridian, will not have on their ballots.
Okay.
So that's the only significant difference. What's on the ballot for everybody are going to be 3 ballot proposals on the back side of the ballot. All election inspectors are instructed to tell voters, please remember to flip the ballot over to vote the complete ballot, because many people forget to turn the ballot over and they vote an incomplete ballot. There are 3 ballot proposals in this particular election. One of them is to end gerrymandering, which is the elected officials, usually the dominant party, controlling how the districts look. So in effect, they choose who their own voters are, and they have often skewed it for their own political benefit. So on the ballot is a means to end that and allow an independent citizen commission to set up voting districts that are fair and balanced for everybody. Another ballot proposal is to legalize marijuana, not just for medical purposes, but under similar guidelines as to what medical marijuana was passed in 2008. Meridian Township is going to be affected by both these proposals that would occur. The third proposal is called Promote the Vote, and it's a series of measures that involve changing election laws here in Michigan to achieve various goals, including allowing same-day voter registration, no reason absentee ballots, and allowing straight ticket voting. And so those are 3 of the proposals that are currently on the ballot.
Okay, and as Meridian Township Clerk, what are your thoughts on those proposals?
So you're asking me my own personal views. So let me clarify for anybody watching. Sometimes people get concerned, like, why am I, in my role of what I do, giving my opinion? The courts have been very clear on this, that elected officials in particular the citizens have an expectation to know how their representatives feel on issues. So it is legal and appropriate for an elected official to express their opinion on any ballot proposal or measure before them. I'm not allowed to expend taxpayer dollars to advance my particular position. The board is not allowed to do that either. If the board was in favor of something on the ballot, we couldn't spend money to say you should support the school proposal or something of that sort. I just want to clarify that because that question does come up from time to time. So now that you ask me my opinion, I will take off my hat as specifically as clerk and speaking on the elections, and I will speak as the elected representative for my constituents. And my answers may be surprising to some people. Number one, on the issue, in the order I said this, the issue on gerrymandering, I am extremely in support and in favor of the voters, not politicians, and of ending gerrymandering. And I'm a strong believer that we need to have an independent citizen commission determine boundaries for voting districts so that the principle that's been established in the Supreme Court over and over again is one person, one vote. One person, one vote. Gerrymandering creates a situation where one person, in effect, has 2 or 3 votes because of the way the districts are drawn. It's unfair, and it reduces voters' preferences and desires and makes for worse public policy when you have gerrymandering. So I absolutely encourage every citizen to vote yes on the proposal to end gerrymandering. When it comes to the recreational use of marijuana, I also support voting in favor of that. I believe that we've seen under medical marijuana, we have a changing industry, a changing view towards how this plant is used in our society, and there are 3 components to marijuana. One is medical, one is industrial use, and one is personal recreational use. This one will take away the criminalization for people that have choose to use it. It will save taxpayer resources that would go to incarceration and the legal system. It will take resources and generate income, generate large income that Colorado has seen in the hundreds of millions of dollars that is to pay for schools and roads, which is what everybody wants money to be able to help pay for those. So I believe that with the proper enforcement, we'll see illegal drug usage go down. Emphasis on other hard drugs can be reduced. Opioid addictions can be dealt with better by using cannabis and understanding how that would operate in our society. So Meridian Township will have to deal with the complexity, and we're dealing it with right now, of how we opt in and what types of provisioning centers we allow. And we are wrestling with a lot of safeguards to make sure that the community is able to allow citizens to use it in a proper and appropriate manner without harm or trouble with perhaps underage children, students, and things of that nature as well. On the third proposal that we talked about, that I mentioned, Promote the Vote, I am in favor of every aspect of that proposal except one. I do, except two actually, I should say. One of them I'm mostly in favor of. I'm in favor of no reason absentee ballots. Absolutely. Anybody should be able to vote 30 days in advance of the election for no reason at all. Many, many states are moving in this direction. So we should allow people up to 30 days to vote. No question. We don't have to tell people you're not going to be at the polls. You just come up and you have a thing, you say, I want an absentee ballot. Check, that's all you have to check off. That's totally a good thing. Same-day voter registration could be problematic if it's the same day as the election. I can tell you as clerk that there could be hassles when people show up at the poll and they're not registered, and now they are going to register at the poll. We're going to develop a system where you can immediately check and do it online. I propose, and I think it's reasonable, that you end voter registration the day before the election. So it's just 1 day. But right now, and for many, many, many years, of course, it's 30 days before the election. So the current law is 30 days before the election. It's been that way for a very, very long time. So a proposal to move it from 30 days before the election to 1 day before the election is a huge improvement for most of the people. Making it the same day of the election could be somewhat problematic and cause some difficulty, so I'm not in favor of that part of the proposal. I'm also specifically and very much opposed to straight ticket voting. I may be one of the only clerks in the state of Michigan that's on the record and is willing to say that. And I speak out strongly against straight ticket voting for several reasons. Number one is we are only one of 9 states in the United States that even had legal straight voting. 41 states have made straight ticket voting illegal. So that means that cuts across all party lines. That means Democratic states, Republican states, red states, blue states, northern states, southern states, across the board have said no to straight ticket voting. And the reason is straight ticket voting promotes the party above people. It puts party platform above individual candidates. And what's wrong about that is individual parties restrict members on how they can vote according to the party platform. So party members are forced to vote according to the dictates of their party. Boom, 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 boom. And you can't mix and match your opinions. You can't be pro-business and generally pro-environment. You can't be pro-gun rights and pro-women's rights, right? These things are owned by individual political parties. You have to be anti-gun and then pro-choice and then pro-environment and so forth. We all know what those list is for the Democratic so-called liberal side and the Republican so-called conservative side. I believe these are false choices that have been promoted onto voters for a very long time, giving those two parties and the top echelons of those parties power that is inappropriate and unnecessary. What we really need are more voter choices. We need better third parties, and we need the Democrats and Republicans to have a greater freedom of how they should be able to vote in the context of their representation of their particular constituents. Straight ticket voting makes it nearly impossible for third parties to have a real chance on the ballot. Because if a Democrat or Republican just votes straight ticket, that means they are not looking at any individual candidate. They don't care about 20 different positions available. All they care about is their belief that the philosophy of the party is more important than any individual that's going to represent them. And I just think that's wrong. And it has nothing to do with how long a voter has to wait in line. That is a very poor argument that you need straight ticket voting in order to get people to move through the line faster. What that's saying is that the choice of an elected official is less important than actually waiting an extra 5 minutes in line. That it's more important to get out of the voting precinct as fast as you can rather than making citizens take the time to look over the ballot and make sure they know who's running for every position and make sure you know who you're selecting for every position. So I absolutely 100% say that I would join the other 41 states in the United States and say no straight ticket voting. It doesn't do us a good service. And what's really disappointing is it's the progressive members of the Democratic Party that have most pushed for this. The most liberal people within the Democratic Party have made the strongest arguments for straight ticket voting, and I believe they're the most mistaken. It contradicts their own philosophy. They don't even realize it. It contradicts their own philosophy. Because really what you're doing is restricting choices and giving power to a select elite of a hierarchical organization. In this case, it's called the Democratic Party. It makes no sense at all to do this. Progressives should be absolutely 100% opposed to straight ticket voting because progressives are the ones that want to have independent parties also represent them. So I will tell you this, Xavier, the secret of what's occurred in this last election, in this last process, is that the Democratic Party to put this on the ballot has decided, that members in the party decided that progressives said our only future is with the Democratic Party. That's, in essence, by making the statement, we want straight ticket voting, liberal, very progressive-minded people said, we can't do this outside the Democratic Party. We need straight ticket voting to try to get Democrats to fill up the ticket. And so that really is, unfortunately, I think, many steps backwards in evolving democracy into the 21st century. We need to advance democracy and not move backwards, and give the party more power over individuals.
Okay, so let me ask you this. What do you think it would take for a third party to have a legitimate chance of actually being able to win a major election?
I am delighted you asked this question, because we've never really had an opportunity to talk about this before in all the years I've been interviewed on these topics. What it's going to take to get a third party to have a real chance here in Michigan and in the United States is to get past ideologies and get into an understanding that this third party is more of a means of how you can trust people within this party to conduct their campaigns, the kind of transparency they're going to be involved in, and how they can conduct themselves once they're in office. Most third parties in the United States have never been able to offer anything other than an ideology based usually on one or two specific issues or orientations. As an example, the Tea Party was really only concerned about pretty much taxation, excessive government, but that was a smokescreen for really, the Tea Party has been funded on the large scale by, very large wealthy corporate donors. Kind of a well-known, this isn't really like, this is pretty straightforward knowledge that the Tea Party itself was really being funded by some large interests, that really the goal was lower tax rates. And then the arguments being put forth had to do with less government regulation and things like that. The Green Party's main emphasis has been on environmental protection, but they started to get involved a lot in social justice and different types of broader human rights issues, and sort of diffuse the message of what the Green Party was. The Taxpayer Party was only interested in lowering taxes. The Natural Law Party was interested in a very, very narrow philosophy, which is sort of construed in how you can't take rights away from people, and they have sort of innate rights. Again, not really pretty well clearly defined, and seem to be focused on some sort of abstract principles. Libertarians have a very sort of an open philosophy that means that we need less government regulation. But when you really take it steps further, many libertarians can't really define if that means no funding of public education. Extreme libertarianism means no environmental protection, no public schools. It only means public defense and certain basic things that government can spend its money on. People don't realize that libertarianism, as when you take it further and further, means we don't really function the way we know government anymore. It's really not a viable philosophy, because we have a complex society that requires us to serve, government to serve as referees, as rule makers, as guideposts, as keeping the marketplace operating honestly. There's a lot of functions that the marketplace can't do, and government takes the place of that. So what I'm pointing out is that all these third parties ultimately don't match the marketing branding of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. A new third party needs to have a great name. It can't be a name that sounds either too narrow, too hard to comprehend, or really doesn't mean anything. And a third party has to be able to appeal to an independent type of voter that says the duopoly of Democrats and Republicans do not represent all the things that I'm interested in. I am a person, let's say as an example, and this isn't me, I'm using this as, let's say, Joe Citizen. Joe Citizen might say, I do believe in my right to own a gun. I also believe in the right for a woman's right to an abortion. I also do believe that we need to protect our water, like what happened in Flint. I also think we want to keep taxes down. I am concerned about paying taxes too much. I also think that we have to protect the rights of LGBT people. So when you go through all that thing that this citizen just said, neither the Democrat or Republican Party can help that person. Because what that person said is half of what the Republican Party says and half of what the Democratic Party said. So that person is forced constantly to choose between this side or this side. What about if candidates ran in a third party that didn't matter that they had to identify themselves as liberal or conservative, but they list a series of viewpoints on a series of issues, and voters now can look and say, that person represents about 85% of my views. I'm going to vote for that person. And that person is a member of, wow, this new political party. We'll just call it right now, we'll call it the New Party. Let's just call it the name, the New Party. I'm going to vote for this person. They're a part of the New Party. And the New Party says, I'm going to raise money, full transparency, report everything. I'm going to have full disclosure of my own personal financial background. Like Donald Trump has still not disclosed his finances. He got elected president, been challenged by people. He goes, nope, I'm not going to reveal my taxes. And he got away with it. He wasn't held accountable to that. The new political party, when you sign on to the new political party, you agree to these principles. I'm going to have full disclosure, full transparency. I'm going to answer a detailed candidate interview. The party could have a detailed candidate interview that covers way in-depth views with open-ended essay questions that allow candidates to fully express themselves. These are all ways that I think citizens would be able to resonate and slowly but surely start to vote for this party. Once you get 5% of the vote for Secretary of State in the last gubernatorial election, you get primary ballot access, which is what the Libertarian Party did in 2016. In 2014, they got 5% of the Secretary of State vote. They are now listed. They're not considered a major political party under the definition Michigan has, but they are considered a political party that is placed on the ballot. And when you're on the ballot, that gives you natural higher access to more voters. That's how you get more voter choices, better voter preferences, and actually a government based on consensus, compromise, and basically you get, in my opinion, better public policy. And I have one summary statement for everything I just said. The two-party system can't handle the workload. Can't handle the workload. So in other words, we need a bigger staff, and that bigger staff to handle the workload means more than two parties.
Okay, so I want to put back on your clerk's hat. For the rest of this, can you talk about kind of the rules during election day? Like what can't people do? What can they do as far as things they can wear or just behavior? Can you kind of just explain, let people know about that?
Sure. So campaigning is not allowed within 100 feet of the polling location. So all election workers and all of our 19 precincts are provided a rope with a 100-foot demarcation, and we know where people can and cannot stand to campaign. So when a voter comes into the voting precinct, they cannot wear any campaign literature or any T-shirts, campaign pins, hats, can't talk on the phone about candidates, about things on the ballot, can't talk politics, basically, because it can be inferred as to affecting the ballot. You can bring a cell phone into the precinct with you. You can talk on the phone. You have to keep your voice down, can't interfere with people concentrating and trying to vote. Election inspectors are authorized and instructed to tell people who are talking loudly to keep their voices down because people are concentrating on the ballot. You can't take any selfies, can't take pictures of the polling location unless you're a member of the media, and that's very restricted right, even if you are a journalist.
Okay, and lastly, let me ask you, is there any last information that you want to give our viewers regarding the election, the date, the time, just important information to know?
There are busy times. If you can't make it to the polls on Tuesday, and your voice needs to be heard. This is going to be the biggest turnout possibly in Michigan history in a gubernatorial election. Predictions are anywhere from 70 to 80%. You can still vote absentee. If you want to vote right now and you're hearing this and you're concerned, you have until Monday at 4 p.m. to get into the township building and get an absentee ballot and vote it right here and get your voice heard. You'll be done with it, and you won't have to wait very long unless there's a line here. If you come to the polls on Tuesday, keep in mind that between the hours of 7 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. is the busiest. It is the busiest time of the day. People are very impatient, and it's probably the one time that there's more sort of an impatient vibe that people have because people are kind of, things are happening. So if you want to avoid the lines, you can plan to come sometime between 8:30 and 11:30 in the morning. You can come between 1:30 and 4:30 in the afternoon, and then you can come sometime after like 6:30 in the evening. Those would be the less busy times. If you come in during those times, you may only wait in line perhaps for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. If you come during the busy time, be prepared to wait for 20, possibly 20, 25 minutes. That's a small price to pay for democracy. The line doesn't mean that there's a problem with the system. It means that there's a popularity going on. The machines take a long time to process the ballots, and that's just the reality of how it is. So people, if you come during those busy times, please stay and just prepare to stay for a little bit longer than you probably feel like you want to stay.
All right. Well, Brett, thank you again for joining us.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it. You're watching Ballot Meridian 2018 general election coverage on HOMTV. I'm Xavier Thompson.